5 years of your life for glory beyond your wildest dreams. A true bargain.
David, don't, Amaka said, stepping closer. Please, it's not worth it. David turned to her, his eyes brimming with tears. Amaka, you have no idea what it's like to feel invisible, to try so hard and still be nothing. I need this. But 5 years? She pleaded. David, think about your family, your future. I've already thought about it, David replied, and this is my only chance. He turned back to the vendor. 5 years, take it. The vendor extended its hand, long and shadowy, and David grasped it without hesitation. A searing cold shot through him, and he gasped as a wave of energy surged from his body into the vendor's.
It is done, the vendor said, its tone final. Your life has been purchased. Spend your years wisely.
In the small town of Uselu, a mysterious market appears once every generation, filled with traders of all sort. The market sellers offer people the ability to fulfill their greatest desires: wealth, fame, love, success, but in return, they demand payment by taking years of life. The cost depends on the magnitude of the desire, and many believe they have years to spare, so they trade eagerly. This night market has drawn visitors from all walks of life for generations: kings, queens, presidents, and even the poorest of villagers. Entry is granted only to the desperate, for the spirits guarding the market, known as the keepers, choose their guests carefully. Invites are said to be mysterious, as the keepers knows precisely who to summon. But this year, the rules of the game were about to change.
Well, well. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, you need to subscribe.
It was the dry season in Uselu, and the Harmattan winds carried the familiar scent of dust and dried leaves. Amaka waited outside the town's bus station, waving at the approaching bus. Her slim, tall frame stood out in the crowd as she adjusted her braided hair and stretched out her arms to greet her friends David, Joy, and Stephen, who stepped off one by one. Look who finally made it, Amaka called, grinning as she pulled David into a quick hug. Uselu looks beautiful, David said with a chuckle, slinging his guitar over his shoulder. Did you plan an adventure for us? Or are we sitting around reminiscing the whole time? You'll see, Amaka teased, leading them toward the cab designated to drive them to their rented apartment. Joy, the youngest, twirled around, taking in the sweeping hills and the sprawling forest. This place feels like magic, she said. I can't wait to explore. What's the plan, Amaka? Adventures, right? Amaka laughed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Stephen said, adjusting his glasses. We're here to relax, not wander off into uncharted territory. Relaxing is overrated, Amaka said with a smirk. We're here for memories, not naps. The group made their way to a charming old house at the edge of Uselu's forest. Baba Ade, the caretaker, greeted them with a wide smile. His stooped frame was draped in a faded agbada, and his eyes sparkled with mischief. Welcome, children. Come in, he said, leading them through the creaking wooden door. The house smelled of aged wood and spices, its walls lined with faded portraits. Later that evening, after a hearty meal of jollof rice and grilled chicken, the friends gathered in the living room. Baba Ade sat by the fire, poking the flames with a stick. So, young ones, Baba Ade began as he settled into his chair near the fire. Have you ever heard of the night market? David raised an eyebrow. Night market? Sounds like a good title for one of my songs. Amaka rolled her eyes. Here we go again. What's the story, Baba? The old man's eyes gleamed as the firelight flickered across his face. The night market is no ordinary market. It appears only once every generation, deep in the forest when the moon is full and the air is heavy with silence. It is said to grant your deepest desires: wealth, fame, health, love, anything your heart desires. Joy leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. That sounds like a fairy tale. What's the catch? Baba Ade's smile faded. The price is time. The market takes years from your life. Some pay a few years, some pay decades. But it's never simple.
The keepers of the market, the faceless figures run the market, and their bargains. He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. Their bargains are binding. No one cheats the keepers. Stephen frowned. You're telling us these keepers can just take time from your life and give you whatever you want? That defies every law of science. Baba Ade chuckled. Not everything in this world can be measured by science, young man. The keepers are ancient beings, older than the trees in this forest. They guard the market fiercely, allowing only those they invite to enter. Amaka then asked, You mean like they send you an IVs? Baba Ade laughed, Not at all. An invitation is not a piece of paper, but a call in your Sula desperation so deep, it resonates with the seekers. Stephen adjusted his glasses. Sounds like an allegory to me. Joy's eyes widened. So, only the desperate can go? Baba Ade nodded. Yes, those with true need who would give anything for what they seek. They are the ones who find the market. David, who had been silent, finally spoke. But what if someone isn't invited and somehow finds their way into the market? What happens then? Baba Ade hesitated, his expression darkening. That is a question I cannot answer, he said carefully. It is not something I have heard of. The market has rules, but whether it punishes those who break them I can't tell. I would not test its patience, though. Amaka smirked, leaning back in her chair. Sounds like a good ghost story to keep kids from wandering into the forest. Baba Ade's eyes narrowed. This is no story, girl. The market has been part of Uselu's history for centuries. Kings, queens, and even the poorest villagers have traded at its stalls. And when they return, they are different. Different how? Joy asked softly. Some achieve great things, but come with consequences I cannot say. And then there are those whose wishes backfire in ways they cannot undo. He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. The keepers take more than time. They take pieces of your soul. A heavy silence fell over the room. The crackling fire seemed louder, and the shadows on the walls stretched long and ominous. But Joy leaned in, her eyes wide with curiosity. What if it's real? What if there's a way to change things? David said nothing but glanced at Joy. He was already thinking of his struggling music career, of how years of hard work had yielded nothing but disappointment. Amaka broke the silence with a laugh. All right, guys, we have all had enough fun for one night. Let's call it a night before Joy starts planning an expedition into the forest. Baba Ade shook his head. The forest is watching, and the keepers know who is worthy of entry. Good night. After everyone had gone into their respective rooms, Joy and David lay awake, their thoughts spinning. David dreamed of fame and success, of giving his siblings a better future. Joy couldn't stop imagining her mother walking again. It was a really long night for them. The next morning, the four friends gathered around the small wooden dining table, the sunlight filtering through the lace curtains. The smell of fresh akara and steaming pap filled the air, but the mood was far from light. We're going into the forest tonight, David declared, breaking the silence. His voice was resolute, his hands gripping his mug as if bracing for the pushback he knew was coming. Amaka's fork clattered onto her plate. Excuse me, did you hit your head in your sleep? No, I'm serious, David replied, meeting her incredulous gaze. What if it's real? Baba Ade said the market grants wishes. My music career, this could be the break I've been waiting for. You can't honestly believe that nonsense, Amaka said, leaning back in her chair. It's just a story to keep people entertained on cold nights. Joy leaned forward, her caramel-toned hands clasped tightly. What if it's not just a story, Amaka? What if it's real? Think about it. My mom could walk again. That's exactly what they want you to believe, Amaka countered. They lure people in with promises of miracles, but there's always a catch. Did you not hear Baba Ade? The market takes pieces of your soul. I'd rather keep my soul intact. Thank you very much. Stephen adjusted his glasses, his brow furrowed. I have to admit, it's far-fetched. But He hesitated, his scientific curiosity getting the better of him. The way Baba Ade described it, the keepers, the invitation sits like some kind of system. What if there's a phenomenon we don't understand? Amaka threw her hands in the air. Oh, great. Now you're entertaining this madness? David leaned forward, his voice rising. I don't have the luxury of waiting around for something to happen, Amaka. I've worked hard for years, and I'm still stuck in the same place. If this market can change my life, I'm taking the chance. Joy's voice cracked as she added, do you know what it's like to watch someone you love suffer every single day? My mom used to be so vibrant, and now she can't even get out of bed. If there's even a tiny chance to fix that, I have to try. Amaka softened, her shoulders slumping. Joy, I get it, but what if it makes things worse? What if you trade away years of your life, and your mom, I don't know, ends up worse off somehow? Joy blinked back tears. It's a risk I'm willing to take. Stephen tapped the table lightly. The thing is, Baba Ade said only those who are invited can find the market. How do we even know we'll get in? David smirked. That's where you come in, Mr. Scientist. You can figure it out. Wait, what? Stephen asked, his glasses slipping slightly. You're the only one who can ask Baba Ade more questions without raising suspicion, David said. You're the curious nerd. You can play the whole scientific interest angle. Amaka groaned. Oh, so now we're dragging Baba Ade into this? No, Joy said quickly. We're not telling him anything. We just need Stephen to ask about the market, like general stuff, so we know how to find it. Stephen looked between them, conflicted. This is ridiculous. Please, Stephen, Joy begged, her voice soft. You're the only one who can do this. If you don't want to come with us, fine, but at least help us figure out where to start. Amaka sighed, rubbing her temples. You're all insane, but I guess if you're determined to go, I'm not letting you do it alone. Stephen sighed heavily, throwing his hands up in defeat. Fine, I'll ask Baba Ade, but don't blame me if this blows up in our faces. Later that morning, Stephen found Baba Ade in the backyard, tending to a small herb garden. The old man hummed softly to himself, his gnarled hands deftly plucking leaves. Baba Ade, Stephen began hesitantly. Do you have a moment? The old man looked up, his expression kind. Ah, Stephen, what brings you out here? I was just thinking about what you said last night, about the night market, Stephen said, feigning casual curiosity. It's such a fascinating story. I can't stop wondering, how do people find the market? Baba Ade straightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. You're not thinking of going, are you? Stephen forced a laugh. No, of course not. I'm just curious. You said only those who are invited can find it. How does that work? The old man stood up from tending to the flowers, studying Stephen carefully. The market calls to those who are desperate enough. It finds them. Invitations aren't something you can see or touch their feelings. A pull deep inside you. The forest opens its paths to the ones who are chosen.
But, hypothetically, Stephen pressed, what if someone wasn't invited? What if they still found their way to the market? Baba Ade's face darkened. That has never happened. As far as I know, the market has rules, and it rarely breaks them. But if someone uninvited were to enter, he trailed off, shaking his head. I cannot say what would happen. The market is not a kind place, Stephen. It does not tolerate those who don't belong. And those who truly seek it will get an invitation, but he that will eat with the devil must have a really long spoon. Stephen swallowed hard, the weight of Baba Ade's words sinking in. Be careful with your curiosity, boy, Baba Ade said, his tone firm. Some things are better left unknown. Stephen returned to the house, where the others were waiting anxiously. Well? David asked, his arms crossed. Stephen sighed. He said the market calls those who are desperate enough, and only they can find it. But he also said if someone uninvited tries to enter, the consequences could be unpredictable. Amaka raised an eyebrow. And you still want to do this? David nodded firmly. We don't have a choice. Joy glanced at Stephen, her eyes pleading.
Will you help us? Stephen hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, but don't expect me to trade anything. Good, David said with a grin. Let's get ready. Amaka crossed her arms. This is the dumbest thing we've ever done. The four of them exchanged nervous glances, knowing they were about to cross a line that shouldn't be uncrossed. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in shadow. The four friends stood at the edge of the woods, the towering trees looming like silent sentinels. Amaka crossed her arms, her braided hair pulled back tightly, her expression skeptical but resolute. This is a terrible idea, she muttered, glancing at the others. Just so we're clear, I'm only here because if you three get yourselves killed, someone has to tell your families what happened. Joy gave a nervous laugh. Thanks for the vote of confidence, David responded. Let's just get this over with. Stephen, flashlight in hand, scanned the tree line. According to Baba Ade, the forest should call to us, whatever that means. The group ventured into the woods, the dense canopy above swallowing what little light remained. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. After what felt like hours of walking, David stopped abruptly. Do you hear that? Amaka frowned. Hear what? Music, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's faint, but it's there. Stephen tilted his head, his brow furrowing. I hear humming, like a low vibration. I feel pulled, Joy said softly, her eyes wide, like something's guiding me. Amaka shook her head. I don't hear or feel anything. Are you guys sure this isn't just in your heads? But as they pressed on, the air began to change. A faint glow appeared in the distance, shimmering like heat waves on a summer road. The sound of soft, melodic music grew louder, weaving through the trees. There, David said, pointing toward the light. That has to be it. As they stepped into the clearing, the friends froze, their breaths catching in their throats. The night market was like nothing they had ever seen. Lanterns of every shape and color floated in midair, casting a kaleidoscope of light over the stalls below. The market was alive with movement shadowy vendors tending to their strange wares, their faces obscured by cloaks and veils. The stalls were filled with oddities, glowing hourglasses, jars of liquid light, books that seemed to whisper, and vials filled with what looked like stars. The air buzzed with an energy that made their skin tingle. This is insane, Stephen murmured, his scientific skepticism crumbling in the face of the impossible. Amaka folded her arms tightly. I don't like this. It feels wrong. The vibrant glow of the night market seemed to dim as David stepped toward a stall tucked at the edge of the marketplace. The vendor, taller than the others, stood cloaked in black fabric that shimmered like the night sky. Its face was hidden, but its voice carried a haunting melody that seemed to resonate in David's chest. You, the vendor said, its voice soft but commanding.
You reek of longing.
David froze, his breath catching. What do you mean? The vendor chuckled a hollow, echoing sound.
You carry pain, a deep hunger. You desire greatness, but have only tasted failure. You've worked tirelessly.
David's fists clenched at his sides. You don't know me.
Oh, but I do, the vendor said, leaning forward slightly.
Though its face remained hidden, David felt the weight of its gaze.
You lie awake at night, wondering if you're good enough. You've sacrificed everything for your music, yet it has given you nothing in return. Your siblings look to you for salvation, but you've given them only scraps of hope.
David's jaw tightened. The vendor's words cut deeper than he cared to admit. I just need a chance.
A chance, the vendor repeated, its tone almost pitiful.
It gestured toward a golden microphone that seemed to hum with energy.
This will grant you what you seek, fame, fortune, songs that will echo across the world. You will become a star so bright that none can ignore you.
David's eyes locked onto the microphone. What's the price?
The vendor raised a hand, its shadowy fingers splaying out. 3 years of your life.
Done, David said without hesitation. Wait, Amaka's voice rang out behind him. She grabbed his arm, spinning him around. David, don't do this. 3 years isn't nothing. You don't know what this market will take from you. David pulled free, his expression raw. You don't get it, Amaka. Amaka recoiled, shocked. What are you talking about? You wouldn't understand, David said, his voice breaking. Your dad's a lawyer. You've got a career, a life. You're fearless, Amaka. You've always had everything figured out. Amaka's brows furrowed. David, that's not true. Isn't it? David responded. I've been stuck in the same place for years. My siblings depend on me, and every day I feel like I'm failing them. I don't care if it costs me 3 years. My life's not worth much anyway. The vendor chuckled again, the sound like dry leaves rustling.
A bold declaration, it said,
Its head tilting slightly.
Your desperation pleases me. Very well, 5 years.
David blinked, startled. Wait, 5? I thought you said 3.
I did, the vendor replied smoothly. But I sense you are willing to give more. 5 years of your life for glory beyond your wildest dreams. A true bargain.
David, don't, Amaka said, stepping closer. Please, it's not worth it. David turned to her, his eyes brimming with tears. Amaka, you have no idea what it's like to feel invisible, to try so hard and still be nothing. I need this. But 5 years? She pleaded. David, think about your family, your future. I've already thought about it, David replied, and this is my only chance. He turned back to the vendor. 5 years, take it. The vendor extended its hand, long and shadowy, and David grasped it without hesitation. A searing cold shot through him, and he gasped as a wave of energy surged from his body into the vendor's. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he felt as though the world around him had stopped. When he let go, the microphone was in his hands. It thrummed with power, its weight both comforting and terrifying.
It is done,
the vendor said, its tone final.
Your life has been purchased. Spend your years wisely.
David turned to Amaka, his shoulders slumping. Her face was pale, her expression a mixture of anger and heartbreak. 5 years, David, she whispered. You gave up 5 years. Do you even care how long you'll live? David's gaze hardened. It doesn't matter. I'll finally make something of myself. That's what counts. Amaka opened her mouth to argue, but the weight of his pain stopped her. She stepped back, shaking her head. I hope you're right. Joy and Stephen, who had been watching from a distance, approached cautiously. Did you really just? Stephen asked, his voice trailing off. David nodded, his grip tightening on the microphone. It's done. Let's go. The group turned away from the stall, but the vendor's final words lingered in David's mind like a haunting melody. Spend your years wisely. As they walked through the glowing marketplace, David couldn't shake the feeling that the deal wasn't entirely over. The walk back to the house was heavy with silence. The forest felt colder, darker than before, as if the night market had left an indelible mark on the land. David clutched the golden microphone tightly, his knuckles white. Joy held the vial close to her chest, her face unreadable. Amaka kept a watchful eye on both of them, her mind racing with questions she didn't dare ask aloud. Stephen walked beside her, the flashlight in his hand trembling slightly. When they finally stepped through the door of the house, Baba Ade was sitting by the fire, his face illuminated by the warm glow. He glanced up, his gaze lingering on each of them in turn. He didn't speak, but the weight of his stare was enough to make Amaka's stomach churn. Let's just go to bed, David muttered, brushing past the others. I'm exhausted. The morning air was crisp, but Amaka barely noticed as she sat on the veranda, her tea untouched in her hands. The sprawling greenery of Uselu stretched out before her, yet the serene beauty of the landscape did little to calm the unease growing in her chest. She replayed the events of the night market over and over, every moment vivid in her mind. The eerie glow, the shadowy vendors, and David's desperate trade, She had kept her distance, refusing to make a deal herself, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the price they had paid was far greater than they realized. The creak of the screen door drew her attention. Joy stepped out, her caramel-toned skin glowing in the soft morning light, her eyes slightly puffy from lack of sleep. She hesitated for a moment before joining Amaka on the veranda. "Good morning," Joy said softly, pulling her sweater tighter around herself. "Morning," Amaka replied, forcing a smile. "You okay?" Joy nodded slowly, then broke into a wide grin. "I have to tell you something, Amaka. My mum, she's walking again." Amaka's eyebrows shot up. "What? Are you serious?" Joy's eyes glistened with emotion as she pulled out her phone and played a video. Her mother stood in their garden, smiling brightly, her steps tentative but steady. "She sent me this morning," Joy said, her voice trembling. "She said she hasn't felt this good in years." Amaka's heart warmed at the sight. "Joy, that's incredible. I'm so happy for you." "Me too," Joy said, wiping at her eyes. I can't believe it. It's like a dream." Amaka smiled, but a thought struck her, and her face froze. Her mind raced back to the night market. She had watched David make his desperate deal, but she didn't recall seeing Joy approach any vendor. Her stomach tightened as a sudden realization hit her. "Joy," Amaka began cautiously, her voice low, "did you make a trade?" Joy's smile faltered. "What?" "At the market," Amaka pressed. "You didn't just wander around, did you? You traded something, didn't you?" Joy hesitated, her expression shifting to guilt. She looked away, unable to meet Amaka's eyes. "I didn't want you to know. I thought you'd stop me." Amaka's heart sank. "Joy." Joy's voice was barely above a whisper. "I traded 3 years of my life." Shock washed over Amaka's face. You see, that night, in the eerie glow of the night market, Joy had wandered away from the group, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. She was drawn to a small stall draped in flowing silver fabric, where a cloaked vendor waited silently. On the counter sat a vial of shimmering liquid, its glow soft and inviting. The vendor tilted its head as Joy approached.
"You carry a heavy heart," it said, its voice deep and melodic. "You seek healing."
Joy's breath caught. "How did you?"
"I know what you desire,"
the vendor interrupted.
"A mother's suffering is a daughter's burden. You wish to free her from it."
Joy's eyes filled with tears. "Yes. She hasn't walked in years. She's in constant pain. I'd do anything to help her." The vendor's shadowy hand gestured toward the vial.
"This will heal her. No pain, no weakness. She will walk again as if she were never broken."
Joy reached for the vial, but the vendor pulled it back slightly.
"There is a price."
Joy's hand trembled. "What kind of price?"
3 years of your life," the vendor said simply. "A small sacrifice for a lifetime of joy."
Joy hesitated, her thoughts spinning. She imagined her mother smiling, dancing, free from the prison of her body. The thought pushed aside her fears. 3 years, she whispered. "That's it?"
"That is all," the vendor replied. "Do you accept?" Joy nodded, her voice steady.
"Yes, I accept." The vendor extended its hand, and Joy took it. A jolt of icy energy surged through her, and for a moment, her vision blurred. When she let go, the vial was in her hands, glowing softly. The vendor's voice followed her as she turned to leave.
"It is done."
Amaka stared at Joy, her jaw slack. "You gave up 3 years of your life? Just like that?" Joy's eyes filled with tears again. "Amaka, I had to. My mom, she was suffering so much. I couldn't just do nothing." "You could have told me," Amaka said, her voice shaking. "I would have tried to stop you, or at least helped you think it through." Joy shook her head. "I didn't want to be stopped. I knew what I wanted, and I got it. My mom's walking again, Amaka. How can that be wrong?" Amaka sighed, running a hand through her braids. "Joy, this isn't just about your mum. Baba Ade said the market doesn't give without taking. Those 3 years, they're gone, and we don't even know what else it might take. Joy looked down, her guilt plain on her face. I know. But what's done is done. I have to believe it was worth it. Joy stood abruptly, brushing off her hands as if to shake away the weight of the discussion. We should head back. We've been here long enough, she said, her voice tinged with forced cheerfulness. Joy nodded. I need to see my mum. I can't wait for another day. She needs me, and I just need to be with her. Amaka sighed, rising from her chair. Maybe you're right. This trip has been more than we bargained for. Literally. Inside the house, David and Stephen sat in the living room. David plucked lazily at the strings of his guitar, the golden microphone glinting ominously on the coffee table. Stephen stared at his notebook, his pen hovering over the page, his expression blank. Amaka entered and clapped her hands. All right, folks, we're packing up. Joy's heading home, and honestly, I think we all could use some distance from this place. David set his guitar aside and leaned back, crossing his arms. Fine, let's go. Not like I'm getting anything done here. My streams are just massive. I really need to start planning radio tours. Stephen, will you be my manager? David asked. Stephen gave a small nod, closing his notebook with a sigh. Let's just go home. The four friends packed their bags in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. By noon, they loaded their belongings into the car and said a quick goodbye to Baba Ade, who watched them from the porch with a knowing expression. Be careful out there, Baba Ade said, his voice grave. The market's reach doesn't end at the forest. Amaka paused, her hand on the car door. What does that mean? The old man shook his head. You'll see soon enough. As the car zoomed off, no one spoke as they drove. The weight of their choices hung heavy in the air. Amaka's thoughts swirled as she leaned back in her chair, staring out at the forest. She wanted to believe it was over, but the gnawing feeling in her gut refused to let her rest. Something about the night market felt unfinished, as though its grip on them was far from over. The journey back to Lagos was quiet, each of them lost in their thoughts. The haunting memories of the night market lingered like an unshakable shadow. As the bus pulled into the city, the friends went their separate ways, returning to lives that would never be the same again.